RDWRER, also known as Road Warrior, is the 12th episode of the 7th season of Frasier. This is directed by Kelsey, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And it's a really delightful episode. It's good fun. It's one I remembered very, very well from the last time I watched it because, well, there's one moment that I love, and we also have a guest appearance from somebody who I think is rather fabulous as well. It starts off in Cafe Nervosa, and Roz and Frasier are there talking about how they celebrated the millennium, the New Year, and then the rest of the episode is Frasier's New Year. And we get the flashback to Niles revealing that Schull and Reese has burned down, so their New Year's plans are no longer happening. And Martin then received his license plate, his custom license plate, in the mail for the Winnebago. This is the RDWRER, which is RDWRER, which means Road Warrior. And with nothing else to do, we cut to Frasier, Niles, Martin, and Eddie in the Winnebago. And they go off driving, they stop off somewhere to eat, but Niles needs a nap, so we see him through the window in the background going into the Winnebago. And a couple of minutes later, while Frasier and Martin are talking, we see somebody else going into the Winnebago. And then the Winnebago drives off. And the two characters there are Clifford and Betty, played by Anthony Zerbe and Rebecca Schull. Love Rebecca Schull, very excited about that. And when Niles wakes up, of course, in the Winnebago, and he phones Frasier, and Frasier is behind the wheel of the Winnebago, but Niles said that he is, because he was ultimately able to get behind the Winnebago wheel when they stopped off and Betty and Clifford left it. And Frasier asked, "Where are you calling from?" And Niles said, "Behind the wheel of the Winnebago." And of course, we can see that Frasier is behind the wheel of the Winnebago. Frasier and Martin thought that Niles was still napping. They didn't even check on him, which seems like an oversight because maybe he'd gone to the bathroom or something, or gone to stretch his legs. I feel like they should have probably checked he was in the vehicle before driving off. So yes, Niles should have gone into the right Winnebago. But at the same time, Martin and Frasier really should have checked. And Niles had already called the police because he woke up and realised there were people in the Winnebago, and he was obviously wanting to call it in and protect himself and get the police there to arrest them for stealing it. But of course that meant he'd called in the license plate. So just after Frasier came off the phone with Niles, the police were there with the Winnebago, with the Road Warrior. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that. We get to see the aftermath once they'd realised what had happened, and they realised that the Road Warrior hadn't been stolen. But I would have liked to have seen kind of the initial explanation and Martin and Frasier's response to that. But what we got was still pretty good. And we get some comedy with Martin saying some things about the police officer that the police officer wasn't meant to hear, but he did. And it was good fun. And they do finally get back to Niles because Niles is then driven back in the other direction. And it's, again, I would have liked to have seen a bit more of that, of Niles trying to sneak back into the Winnebago without them noticing, and I think we could have had a bit more comedy there, but the episode's only going to be so long. I think maybe they could have quickened up the beginning and we could have got a little bit more out of this story, but what we got it was still good. I just think it could have been even funnier. And they finally get to their destination. They cross over the time zone, so they are there just for midnight, and they're all wearing their smart suits, including Eddie. Eddie looks absolutely adorable in his little outfit. And then Frasier leads them in a song to Auld Lang Syne, and it was a really beautiful moment, and it's definitely a funny episode. We get a bit of Daphne as well. Daphne's in it at the very beginning, and I think it would have been interesting if she went along for the ride, but it definitely didn't need to be the case. So yes, I think maybe it would have been a bit more interesting if they'd maybe started off just on the day rather than having the flashback, but of course they needed a reason for Roz to be in the episode because Roz is in every episode, so I understand why it started off at Cafe Nervosa and then we had the flashback, but I think they could have done a little bit more with the story. They could have got a little bit more out of it. But that being said, I still really thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's a delightful episode, and I can't remember what I thought the first time, and I'd love to know if you've just watched this for the first time, or indeed if you can remember your initial thoughts. Did you think Niles had gone into the wrong Winnebago? Or did you think, as Niles did, that somebody had stolen it? I genuinely, I cannot remember how I felt, and obviously I could remember what happened. But either way, it's an absolute delight. RDWRER is a really great episode of Frasier, and I'm sure it's one I'll always really thoroughly enjoy.